The massive training hall of the Galactic Defense Academy buzzed with nervous energy as 4 to 7 cadets from across the known galaxy waited in their seats. The hall was enormous, with curved walls that stretched up toward a domed ceiling filled with stars from a dozen different worlds. Each seat was designed to accommodate the wildly different body types of the galaxy's sentient species. James Morrison sat in the third row, his human form looking small compared to most of his classmates. To his left sat a Corellian warrior named Brutus, whose thick gray skin and massive shoulders made him look like a living mountain. Behind James, a crystalline being called Vera sparkled within a light, her transparent body refracting the hall's lighting into rainbow patterns across the walls. Scattered throughout the room were dozens of other species, some with tentacles instead of arms, others with multiple heads, and a few that seemed to be made of living metal. James had been at the academy for 8 months now, and he still felt like an outsider. Humans were new to the galactic community, having only made contact with alien civilizations 5 years earlier. Most species had been part of the Galactic Alliance for centuries, some for millennia. They had proven themselves in countless battles and missions. Humans were still trying to earn their place. The conversations around him were a mix of languages, but the universal translator in his ear made everything clear. The aliens were discussing their morning combat training, comparing techniques that had been passed down through generations of warriors. James listened quietly, as he usually did. Speaking up often led to awkward silences as the other cadets remembered they were talking to one of the newcomers. Suddenly, the lights dimmed and a hush fell over the hall. Instructor Thane walked onto the central platform, his boots clicking against the metal floor with military precision. Thane was a Valerian, a species known throughout the galaxy for producing the finest military tacticians. His blue-green skin was covered in scars from battles fought across 3 different star systems, and his 4 arms moved with practiced efficiency as he activated the hall's display screens. "Cadets," Thane's voice boomed through the chamber, his accent thick with the authority of someone who had seen real combat. "Today marks the midpoint of your training. You have learned theory, practiced in simulations, and competed in controlled exercises. Now it is time for something different." The screens around the hall flickered to life, showing images that made several cadets gasp in recognition. The pictures showed a creature that looked like nightmares made real, a massive predator with 6 glowing red eyes, claws that could slice through starship hull, and a hide so dark it seemed to absorb light itself. "The Void Stalker," Thane continued, watching the reactions of his students carefully. "For those unfamiliar with this species, they are considered the apex predator of deep space. They live in the dark between stars, hunting ships, and space stations. A single Void Stalker destroyed the mining colony on Zirion Prime last year, killing 300 beings before it could be stopped." James felt his mouth go dry. Around him, the alien cadets were shifting in their seats, and he could hear nervous clicking, chirping, and rumbling sounds as different species expressed their anxiety in their own ways. Even Brutus, who came from a warrior culture that celebrated fighting impossible odds, was gripping the arms of his chair with enough force to leave dents in the metal. 3 months ago, Thane continued, a Void Stalker was captured alive after attacking a cargo convoy near the Nebula of Ghosts. It has been brought here, to the Academy, for one purpose, to serve as the ultimate test of your training. The silence in the hall was complete now. James could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears as he stared at the images of the creature on the screens. Every instinct his evolution had given him was screaming at him to run, to hide, to be anywhere but in this room listening to what he knew was coming next. "I need one volunteer," Thane said, his 4 eyes scanning the assembled cadets slowly. "One of you will face this creature in a controlled combat scenario. The test is not about killing the beast, that would be impossible for a cadet. The test is about survival, about thinking clearly under the most extreme pressure possible, about proving that you can function as a member of the Galactic Defense Force when facing the unknown." James watched as something remarkable happened. Every alien in the room, beings from warrior cultures and predator species, beings who had been bred for combat and raised on tales of glorious battle, took a step backward. It was subtle, a slight shift in their seats, a leaning away from the platform, an unconscious retreat from what Thane was asking. These were the sons and daughters of civilizations that had conquered worlds, species that had evolved to be perfect killers, beings with natural weapons and armor that made them living war machines. And every single one of them was afraid. James looked around the room and realized something that surprised him. He was afraid too, more afraid than he had ever been in his life. But fear had never stopped him before. When his apartment building had caught fire back on Earth, he had run toward the flames to help his neighbors escape. When the earthquake had hit his hometown, he had spent 3 days digging through rubble to find survivors. Being afraid was normal. Letting fear control him was not. Without really thinking about what he was doing, James stood up from his seat and stepped forward into the aisle. "I volunteer, sir." The silence that followed was deafening. 4 to 6 alien heads turned to stare at him with expressions of shock, admiration, and disbelief. Instructor Thane's 4 eyes widened slightly, the first emotion James had ever seen the veteran warrior display. "Cadet Morrison," Thane said slowly, "do you fully understand what you are volunteering for?" James looked up at the images of the Voidstalker still displayed on the screens around them. His hands were shaking slightly, but his voice was steady when he answered. "Yes, sir. I understand completely." The news of James Morrison's volunteer decision spread through the academy like wildfire. Within hours, every cadet, instructor, and staff member knew that the human had stepped forward when no one else would. The reaction was a mixture of respect, confusion, and genuine concern for what many saw as a death sentence. James found himself eating lunch alone in the cafeteria the next day, not because others were avoiding him, but because he had become something of a celebrity. Aliens would walk by his table, nod respectfully, and continue on without sitting down. It was as if they thought he was already dead and deserved some kind of solemn reverence. Emma Clark changed that when she slammed her food tray down across from him with enough force to make his drink splash. "Have you completely lost your mind?" she demanded, her green eyes flashing with anger and worry. Emma was one of only 2 other humans at the academy, and she had become James's closest friend over the past 8 months. She was small, barely 5 feet tall, but she had a fierce determination that had earned her respect among their alien classmates. "Hello to you too, Emma," James said calmly, continuing to eat his meal as if nothing had happened. "Do not joke with me right now," Emma snapped, leaning forward across the table. "A Voidstalker, James? These things eat starships for breakfast. They hunt in the vacuum of space. They have been the nightmare of space travelers for thousands of years." James put down his fork and looked at her seriously. "Someone had to volunteer. But why you?" Emma's voice cracked slightly. "Why did it have to be you?" "Because I was the only one who stepped forward," James replied simply. "Did you see them, Emma? All those warriors, all those predators, beings from cultures that worship combat and honor above everything else. They were all afraid." "They were being smart," Emma said firmly. "Fear keeps you alive. Fear is what evolution gave us to avoid stupid decisions like fighting apex predators." Before James could respond, a shadow fell across their table. They looked up to see Dr. Rachel Hayes, the Academy's head medical officer and the only other human on the permanent staff. Dr. Hayes was in her 50s, with gray-streaked brown hair and the kind of calm competence that came from years of patching up soldiers after impossible battles. "Cadet Morrison," she said, her voice professional but warm, "I need you to report to the medical bay immediately for a full physical evaluation." James nodded and stood up. Emma grabbed his arm as he moved to leave. "This is not over," she warned him. "We are going to talk about this more." The medical bay was a marvel of galactic technology, equipped to handle the medical needs of dozens of different species. Dr. Hayes ran James through a battery of tests that took the entire afternoon. She measured his reflexes, tested his strength, analyzed his bone density, and put him through simulations that pushed his body to its limits. When the tests were complete, Dr. Hayes sat him down in her office and delivered her findings with the brutal honesty that made her one of the most respected medical officers in the Galactic Defense Force. "Your reflexes are good for a human," she began, consulting her tablet. "But compared to most species here, you might as well be moving underwater. The average Corellian warrior has reaction times 3 times faster than yours. A Zephyrian can move so quickly they appear to teleport to human eyes." James nodded, having expected this news. "Your natural armor is non-existent," Dr. Hayes continued. "Your skin can be pierced by a sharp stick. Most of your classmates have hide that can deflect energy weapons. Some of them are literally made of living metal." "I understand," James said quietly. "Your strength is below average for galactic standards. You could not break free from the grip of even the smallest adult Goliath. Your endurance is decent, but nothing special compared to species that evolved on high-gravity worlds or in harsh environments." Dr. Hayes paused and looked at him over her glasses. "Do you want me to continue, or do you understand how outmatched you are?" "I understand perfectly," James replied. "But I am still going through with it." Dr. Hayes sighed and put down her tablet. "There is one thing, though. Something that might give you a chance." "What is that?" "Adaptability," she said. "Most species in the galaxy evolved to fill very specific niches. They became incredibly good at one thing, but that specialization cost them flexibility. The Corellians are perfect warriors, but they think in straight lines. The Zephyrians are incredibly fast, but they cannot handle unexpected changes to their environment. The telepathic species can read minds, but they become confused when facing alien thought patterns. James leaned forward, interested despite himself. Humans are different, Dr. Hayes continued. We are not the strongest, or the fastest, or the smartest. But we can adapt. We can learn new skills quickly. We can think outside the parameters that our evolution set for us. We can change our behavior based on new information faster than almost any other known species. Will that be enough? James asked. Dr. Hayes was quiet for a long moment. I honestly do not know. But it is the only advantage you have. That evening, James sat in the observation lounge looking out at the stars. The Academy orbited a small moon, and the view of space was breathtaking from this vantage point. He was not alone for long. Aliens began to approach him throughout the evening, each with their own perspective on what he was attempting. Brutus, the massive Corellian warrior, sat beside him without invitation. For several minutes, they sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars. My people honor courage above all else, Brutus finally rumbled in his deep voice. We believe that how a warrior faces death defines their entire life. And? James asked. And I think you are either the bravest being I have ever met, or the most foolish. Brutus turned to look at him with his small, intelligent eyes. I have not decided which yet. As the evening wore on, more aliens came to speak with him. Some offered advice, others shared stories of their own battles, and a few simply sat with him in quiet support. By the time the artificial night cycle began, James realized something important had changed. For the first time since arriving at the Academy, he felt like he belonged. Tomorrow, the real preparation would begin. The morning of the test arrived with an artificial dawn that slowly brightened the Academy's corridors. James had barely slept, his mind racing through everything he had learned about Voidstalkers over the past week. He ate a light breakfast alone in his room, knowing that a full stomach might slow him down or worse, come back up when the fear hit him. The testing arena was located deep beneath the Academy's main structure, carved directly into the moon's rocky surface. As James walked through the corridors leading to the arena, he passed windows that showed him just how many people had come to watch. The observation decks were packed with beings from across the galaxy. Word had spread beyond the Academy, and representatives from major galactic governments had arrived to witness what many were calling either humanity's greatest triumph or its most spectacular failure. Emma walked beside him, her face pale but determined. She had barely spoken that morning, but James could feel her worry radiating from her like heat from a furnace. Dr. Hayes flanked his other side, carrying a medical kit and looking every bit as nervous as Emma. Remember what we practiced, Dr. Hayes said quietly as they approached the arena entrance. Stay mobile. Use your environment. Do not try to fight it directly. Your job is to survive, not to win. I know, James replied, his voice steadier than he felt. The arena itself was a marvel of engineering. The massive dome could simulate any environment in the known galaxy, from the ice fields of Arcturus 7 to the molten rock plains of Vulcan Prime. Today, it was set to a basic configuration, a rocky landscape with scattered boulders, a few metal structures for cover, and artificial lighting that cast long shadows across the uneven ground. James stood at the center of the arena, feeling very small under the vast dome. His equipment was standard Academy issue, a pulse rifle that could fire both stunning and lethal charges, personal energy shields that would protect him from minor impacts, basic survival gear, and a combat suit that felt like paper compared to what he was about to face. Above him, in the observation decks, he could see hundreds of faces looking down. Some were alien features he could not read, but others were clearly excited, worried, or amazed. In the front row of the main deck, he spotted Instructor Thane standing with several high-ranking officers whose uniforms indicated they were from the Galactic Defense Force headquarters. Cadet Morrison, Thane's voice echoed through the arena speaker system, "Are you ready to begin?" James looked up toward the observation deck and nodded. "Yes, sir. Remember, this is a survival test. Your objective is to remain alive and functional for 30 minutes. The creature will be released in 10 seconds. James felt his heart rate spike as he heard mechanical sounds from somewhere beneath the arena floor. Somewhere below him, containment systems were opening, and something that had terrorized the galaxy for millennia was being set free. 5 seconds, Thane announced. James raised his rifle and tried to control his breathing. Everything Dr. Hayes had taught him about combat stress came flooding back. Stay calm. Keep moving. Think 3 steps ahead. Release the Void Stalker. The creature that emerged from the containment tube in the center of the arena was even more terrifying in person than it had been in the images. It was massive, at least 12 feet tall when it stood upright, but it moved on all 6 limbs with a liquid grace that made James's skin crawl. Its hide was so black it seemed to absorb light, creating a hole in reality where the creature moved. 6 red eyes, each the size of James's fist, swiveled independently as they scanned its new environment. For a moment that felt like hours, the Void Stalker simply stood there, taking in its surroundings. James could see its nostrils flaring as it tested the air, and he realized it was learning his scent. When those 6 eyes finally focused on him, James felt a terror so primal that his knees almost buckled. The creature began to circle him slowly, like a cat playing with a mouse. It was studying him, James realized, trying to understand what kind of prey it was facing. The Void Stalker had probably never seen a human before. They were too new to the galaxy to have encountered these deep space predators. James kept his rifle trained on the creature but did not fire. Dr. Hayes had been clear about this. His first shot had to count, because it would also be the signal that the real fight had begun. The stalker completed its circle and stopped directly in front of James, perhaps 20 feet away. For a heartbeat, Hunter and hunted stared at each other across the arena floor. James could hear his own breathing echoing in his helmet, could feel sweat running down his back despite the suit's climate control. Then, without any warning, the creature attacked. James had thought he was prepared for the stalker's speed, but nothing could have readied him for the reality of it. The creature moved so fast it seemed to teleport, crossing the 20 feet between them in less than a second. James threw himself to the right, rolling behind a boulder as claws that could slice through starship hulls swept through the space where he had been standing. The impact when the creature hit the boulder sent shockwaves through the ground. James came up firing, his pulse rifle sending blue energy bolts toward the stalker's center mass. The shots hit but barely seemed to affect the creature. Its hide absorbed most of the energy, and what did get through only seemed to make it angrier. The Void Stalker's tail, which James had almost forgotten about, whipped around the boulder like a striking snake. The impact against his personal shield sent him flying across the arena floor, his equipment sparking and failing as he tumbled end over end. James came to rest against one of the metal structures, his vision blurry and his ears ringing. Through the haze, he could see the stalker approaching again, moving with the confident pace of a predator that knew its prey was already beaten. This was going to be much harder than he had imagined. 20 minutes into the battle, James was bleeding from a dozen small cuts where the Void Stalker's claws had found gaps in his armor. His rifle was down to 15% power, his personal shields had failed completely, and every muscle in his body screamed with exhaustion. The creature had been toying with him, striking fast and then retreating, watching him grow weaker with each exchange. James crouched behind a twisted piece of metal that had once been part of the arena's obstacle course. The stalker had destroyed most of the cover in the arena during their fight, reducing boulders to rubble and bending metal structures like paper. But something had changed in the last few minutes, and James was beginning to notice patterns that worried him far more than his own injuries. The creature was not just hunting him anymore. It was studying the arena itself. James watched through a gap in his makeshift shelter as the Void Stalker moved along the arena's wall, its claws testing the surface with careful precision. It had done this twice now, probing different sections of the dome with what looked like scientific curiosity rather than random aggression. A cold realization hit James like ice water in his veins. The stalker was looking for a way out. He thought back to everything he had learned about these creatures during his preparation. Void Stalkers were intelligent, far more intelligent than most people realized. They had to be, to survive in the emptiness between stars, hunting ships and avoiding the military forces that tried to destroy them. This one had been captured alive, which meant it had been studying its captors just as much as they had been studying it. The creature paused at one section of the wall, and James heard a sound that made his blood freeze, a low, rhythmic tapping. The stalker was not just testing the wall's strength. It was listening to the echoes, mapping the structure beyond the arena. It knew there were thousands of beings in the observation decks above, and it wanted to reach them. James keyed his communicator with shaking hands. "Instructor Thane," he whispered urgently, trying to keep his voice low enough that the creature would not hear him. "The stalker is not just hunting me. It is trying to escape." There was a pause before Thane's voice came back through his earpiece. "Explain, Cadet." "It has been testing the walls, listening to the structure. I think it knows about the observation decks. If it breaks through..." James did not need to finish the thought. A Void Stalker loose in the academy would be a massacre. As if summoned by his words, the creature suddenly struck the wall with tremendous force. The impact sent vibrations through the entire dome, and James heard alarmed voices from the observation decks above. Emergency lights began flashing throughout the arena as structural sensors detected the damage. All observation decks, begin immediate evacuation, Thane's voice boomed through the Academy's communication system. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. The Void Stalker struck the wall again, and this time James could see cracks spreading through the reinforced material. The creature's optical camouflage activated, rendering it nearly invisible as it prepared for another assault on the weakening barrier. But something strange happened to James in that moment. Instead of the terror he had felt throughout the fight, he felt a familiar calm settle over him. It was the same feeling he had experienced during disasters on Earth, when his apartment building had caught fire, when the earthquake had hit his hometown. When chaos surrounded him, when others panicked, James Morrison found his center. He disabled his rifle's safety settings and switched it to full power mode, knowing this would drain his remaining energy in minutes but also knowing he might not have minutes to spare. Then he did something that went against every survival instinct he possessed. He stepped out from behind his shelter and walked toward the center of the arena. "Hey!" he shouted at the invisible creature. "Over here." The camouflage flickered off as the stalker turned toward him, clearly surprised by this change in behavior. Its prey had been running and hiding for 20 minutes. Why was it now approaching? James raised his rifle but did not aim it at the creature. Instead, he pointed it at one of the arena's primary power conduits that ran along the floor. "You want out of here? So do I. But not your way." He fired a sustained burst at the conduit, causing it to explode in a shower of sparks. The arena's main lighting failed, plunging them into the red glow of emergency illumination. More importantly, the explosion had destroyed part of the arena's environmental control system. The Void Stalker hesitated, clearly confused by this turn of events. It had expected its prey to continue running, to continue being afraid. This behavior was outside its understanding. James moved to another power conduit and destroyed it as well. Then another. Each explosion made the creature more uncertain, more cautious. It began to circle him again, but this time it was the predator that seemed confused and wary. "You have been in a cage for months," James said quietly, knowing the creature could hear him even if it could not understand his words. "I know what that feels like. Being trapped, being studied, being treated like a thing instead of a thinking being." James reached the arena's main environmental control panel and raised his rifle toward it. "But I am not going to let you hurt innocent people to get your freedom." The Void Stalker lunged toward him, but James had been expecting this. He rolled aside and fired at the control panel, causing a massive systems failure throughout the arena. The artificial gravity fluctuated, the temperature controls went offline, and most importantly, the structural integrity fields that reinforced the dome began to fail. But instead of making escape easier, James had made it impossible. The arena was now in emergency lockdown, its blast shields automatically engaging to prevent structural collapse. The creature was trapped more securely than before, and it seemed to realize this. For the first time since the fight began, the Void Stalker looked uncertain. Its prey had just sacrificed its own chances of survival to prevent the creature's escape. This was behavior that did not fit any hunting pattern the stalker understood. James stood in the center of the failing arena, his rifle trained on the confused predator, and realized that everything was about to change. The arena was in chaos. Emergency lights cast eerie red shadows across the damaged dome while backup systems struggled to maintain basic life support. James stood in the center of the destruction, his rifle aimed at the Void Stalker, but something had fundamentally changed in the dynamic between predator and prey. The creature had stopped its aggressive circling. Instead, it sat back on its haunches, 6 red eyes fixed on James with what looked almost like curiosity. The human's behavior had broken every pattern the stalker understood about prey animals. Prey ran. Prey hid. Prey tried to escape. They did not deliberately trap themselves with their predator. James kept his weapon trained on the beast, but his mind was racing through everything he had observed during their battle. The stalker was intelligent, more intelligent than anyone had given it credit for. Its escape attempts had been methodical, calculated. Its attacks on James had been precise, designed to wear him down rather than kill him quickly. This was not just a mindless predator. This was a thinking being. "You have been alone for months," James said quietly, his voice carrying clearly in the damaged arena's silence. "Captured, studied, isolated from your own kind. No wonder you are desperate to get out." The creature tilted its massive head, almost as if it was listening. James knew it could not understand his words, but tone and body language were universal among intelligent species. Slowly, carefully, James lowered his rifle. The movement caused gasps from the observation decks above, where the evacuation had been halted by the arena's lockdown systems. Thousands of beings watched in stunned silence as the human deliberately made himself more vulnerable. "I know what it feels like to be trapped," James continued, taking a small step toward the creature. "To be surrounded by beings who do not understand you, who see you as something dangerous just because you are different." The Void Stalker's optical camouflage flickered on and off, a sign of confusion or uncertainty. Its claws, which could slice through starship hull, flexed against the arena floor but did not strike. James thought about his time at the academy, about being one of only 3 humans among hundreds of alien cadets. About the looks of suspicion and doubt he had faced every day. About proving himself over and over again to beings who saw his species as weak, primitive newcomers to the galactic community. "The difference is," James said, taking another step closer, "I chose to be here. You did not." The creature made a sound James had not heard before, a low, rumbling vocalization that was not quite a growl and not quite a purr. It was communication, James realized. The stalker was trying to talk to him. In the observation decks above, alien scientists were frantically taking notes. No one had ever recorded a void stalker attempting to communicate with another species. The implications were staggering. James holstered his rifle completely, an act that brought shocked silence from the thousands of observers. He was now defenseless against a creature that could kill him in seconds, and everyone watching knew it. "I am not going to hurt you," James said, moving closer still. "And I think you have figured out that killing me will not get you what you want." The stalker's head tilted again, and this time James was certain he saw intelligence in those 6 red eyes. Not just animal cunning, but true sapient thought. The creature was evaluating him, trying to understand what kind of being would show mercy to its captor. James reached the arena's emergency communication panel, damaged but still functional. With deliberate slowness, he activated the system and spoke directly to the observation deck. "Instructor Thane, I need to make a recommendation." Thane's voice came through the speakers, tight with tension. "Cadet Morrison, step away from the creature immediately." "No, sir," James replied calmly. "I need you to listen to me. This being is not just a predator. It is intelligent. It can communicate. It deserves better than a cage." The Void Stalker moved closer to James, its massive form towering over him. But instead of attacking, it extended one clawed hand toward the communication panel. Very gently, with precision that spoke of careful thought, it touched the device. The sound that came through the speakers was unlike anything anyone had heard before, a complex series of tones and harmonics that clearly represented language. The creature was trying to speak to the assembled observers. Dr. Hayes' voice came through James's earpiece, filled with wonder. "James, what you have accomplished here, this changes everything. No one has ever established communication with a void stalker. The scientific implications alone." "It is not about science," James interrupted, looking up at the massive creature beside him. "It is about recognition. About understanding that intelligence takes many forms." Instructor Thane's voice cut through the chatter. "Cadet Morrison, you have completed your test. Report for debriefing immediately." James looked at the Void Stalker one last time. The creature met his gaze with what he could only interpret as gratitude and respect. Then, moving with dignity rather than aggression, it walked to the center of the arena and settled down, waiting. "It will not try to escape again," James said with certainty. "It just wanted to be heard." The evacuation of the observation decks proceeded smoothly, with beings from dozens of species talking excitedly about what they had witnessed. James was escorted to the medical bay, where Dr. Hayes treated his wounds while asking him hundreds of questions about his interaction with the creature. Emma was waiting for him when he finally returned to his quarters, her face streaked with tears of relief and pride. "You did it," she said simply. "You actually did it." "Did what?" James asked, suddenly exhausted. "You proved that humans belong here," she replied. "Not because we are stronger or faster or smarter than anyone else, but because we can see possibilities where others see only problems." Over the following weeks, James Morrison became famous throughout the galaxy. But more importantly, human applications to the Galactic Defense Academy increased by over 1,000%. Species that had dismissed humanity as primitive newcomers began to seek out human perspectives on difficult problems. The Void Stalker, now recognized as a sapient being rather than a mindless predator, became the subject of intensive but respectful study. It learned to communicate through computer interfaces and eventually testified about the destruction of ships and stations from its own perspective, as a starving exile defending itself against what it perceived as invasion of its territory. James often visited the creature, now housed in comfortable quarters rather than a cage. They could not speak the same language, but they understood each other perfectly. Both were beings who had found themselves far from home, trying to prove they belonged in a universe that often seemed hostile to outsiders. And in proving themselves, they had changed that universe forever.